You're very welcome back. Now, our next guest has written a book giving us the inside track on one of Ireland's most controversial figures, Eamon de Valera. Shortlisted for a Bord Gáis Energy Irish Book Award, the author is no stranger to silverware, having won accolades for his previous works.
Author, journalist and presenter of the Current Affairs show Primetime, David Mccullagh, joins us now. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Hi, David.
Good morning.
Tell us briefly about, not so much about de Valera, but his background, where he came from, and why you think he's become not such a divisive figure, but...
Well, I think divisive is fair enough. I've been quite struck since the book was published, the sort of different views that get expressed to me, both in person and on social media and everything. And they fall into one of two camps. Dev is Lord God Almighty, and any criticism cannot possibly be entertained. Dev is the devil incarnate, and you know, he's responsible for everything bad that ever happened in Ireland and shouldn't get credit for anything.
It completely polarises people.
Yeah, and what I was trying to do with the book was I was trying to sort of steer a middle course to be critical where criticism is justified, and it is justified on occasion, but also to give him credit for what the good things he did, which he did many good things. But he is an extraordinarily divisive figure, probably because of the Civil War. But what I was interested in particular in this book, this is volume 1 of 2.
Yes.
He says, rolling his eyes.
Volume 2, according to the publishers, volume 2 is due out this time next year. So
well done. Well done.
Bit of pressure on. Yeah. Anyway, this book is called Rise, and it traces his first half century up until 1932, just as he's about to take power as head of his first government, first Fianna Fáil government. And it's about his rise. And his rise is extraordinary because when you look at it, this is a guy, he was born in New York, question marks over whether his parents were married, sent back home to rural County Limerick to be brought up by his granny, grew up in pretty considerable poverty in Limerick. You know, they had a labourer's cottage from the council, half an acre of land, really tough circumstances. And yet, by force of character, by energy, by determination, he manages to rise up from that, win a scholarship, goes to Blackrock College, becomes a teacher. And really, what I was looking at in his background is what are the factors that kind of pushed him that way.
Because even as far as that's an incredible story.
Oh, it's an incredible achievement.
Just to get there.
Even to get a secondary education at that time. You know, a tiny minority of people in the country. So I was looking at his background, and you don't want to go all Freudian and psychoanalytical and everything, but there are things in his background that obviously had an effect on him. And one of them is about the parents' marriage. Now, whether his parents were married or not is of no concern of yours or mine. You know, it doesn't affect our judgment of him. But the point is, it affected him. He was very bothered about the fact that he couldn't find a wedding certificate from his parents for his parents' marriage, and he made efforts in every decade of his life, and he lived until he was 93. Every decade he went back to it. He was like picking a scab. He went back to it.
Was there an answer?
No, there wasn't an answer. Or there hasn't been an answer yet.
Does this fixation come because he ended up having such a fixation, David, on the national identity?
Well, I think that's important. When he was after he was tried in 1916 and sentenced to death, he wrote a letter to his mother because he's trying to find out more about his background. And he wrote a letter to his mother and said, "In international law, am I American or am I a Spaniard or what am I?" And you know, again, you don't want to be too psychoanalytical about it, but obviously that is driving his sense of identity. His identification with Irish nationalism comes, in some part at least, from the fact that he had questions about his own identity. So his mother's story was she emigrated to New York in 1879. Her story was that she met this Spaniard, Juan Vivian de Valera. They got married in 1881. De Valera himself was born in 1882. Then the father had to go west because he suffered from TB. And a lot of people with chest complaints went to the Rockies because the air was better, and he died there. Problem is, there's no record of the father in the census, the American census of 1880. There's no record of him entering the United States, and they have quite good records of arrivals off ships, like de Valera's mother's recorded on it. There's no record of the wedding. He's mentioned on the birth certificate and the baptismal certificate of Eamon de Valera, and then there's no record of his death and no grave ever been found, nothing like that. So it's quite possible that this is all just coincidence. Records weren't kept as well back then as they are now, and certainly when he died in the West, in Denver or possibly New Mexico, it was still the Wild West, so, you know, records weren't kept as well as they would be now. It's quite possible that this is all coincidence, but there are question marks, and the question marks affected de Valera.
There were also question marks in terms of 1916, where some of his political opponents kind of accused him of having a breakdown.
Having a nervous breakdown, yeah. That's the charge that was made. Now, the charge was only made after the Civil War split, and it was all the fellas who opposed him over the Civil War who made these claims. So I looked quite closely at that and at all the witness statements that are made. And what strikes me is that De Valera was a pretty good officer. He was in command in Boland's Bakery, not Boland's Mills, as everybody always gets it wrong, but Boland's Bakery. He was extremely well prepared. He was very good at being able to tell his subordinate officers where they were supposed to be, where they would get the supplies they needed and all the rest of it. His problem was that he didn't delegate. He insisted on doing everything himself. At one stage, he told the rest of the garrison to go to sleep and he'd do sentry duty overnight. Now, if you're the commanding officer, you need to get your rest. Or you're not going to be able to make proper decisions.
Yeah,
so by the end of the week, by the Thursday or the Friday, he was completely exhausted. He hadn't slept properly, and he was making decisions and giving orders that were, a little bit strange, I would say.
But that strikes me that it comes from his background, because he'd always done everything by himself. He'd done everything. He'd dragged himself out of where he was, got himself as far as he could. And that seemed to be a mantra that carried on beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. You can certainly see that.
Would you say, David, you're a fan? Because we talked at the start of this about him polarising people and being a divisive character. I mean, you're invested in some shape or form to write 2 volumes.
Well, I'm invested in hoping that people buy the thing. I don't know that I'd say I'm a fan, but certainly after researching his life, I have a lot more sympathy with him.
Okay.
A lot more sympathy with him. I mean, the background was tough, and I think he showed qualities of leadership, qualities of strength of character to get out of that, and
it's hard
determination.
not to admire that.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But I mean, you don't necessarily need to agree with everything he did to admire that. And I think it's important for people who maybe have that view of him as some kind of a demon to maybe have a little think about what he did, and maybe
it might give a greater understanding to what was going on.
And you have to put him in the context of his times. I mean, one of the things that people have been sort of given out about him in their interactions with me is, he set up a Catholic state and all the rest of it. He was too subservient to the church. But you have to look at that in the context of the times, and you have to look at that in the context of the other sheriff, W.T. Cosgrave, who was even more subservient to the church. So, you don't have to agree with it, but you do have to look at it in the context of its times.
Very quickly, how are you feeling this weekend about what
nervous
could lie ahead this week?
Look, I used to be, I was 12 years a political correspondent. I used to have to make predictions about what was going to happen in politics. They were almost invariably wrong. Luckily, I'm not in that position anymore, so no more than anybody else, I don't have any great insight into it. But I do know from my years down in Leinster House that sometimes things spin out of control, and despite the best efforts of all concerned, they can end up with an outcome that they didn't particularly want.
It could change the content of prime time for the next few weeks as well.
It certainly could, and I mean, well, it does, because on Tuesday, Mccullagh had done a really fantastic piece about carers and the families of carers, and we were going to devote the entire programme, an extended programme, to it, to a discussion of that issue. I'm not really sure whether that's what's going to happen with that, because we might have to throw everything out and
everything's in a state of flux, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
but this is nice for viewers to see that this is David Mccullagh, the historian as well as the journalist and the broadcaster. So,
and the best of luck with the book.
Thank you very much, David.
Good luck. Thank you, David.
Right, tune in to Ireland AM Wednesday morning to see how David and the rest of the authors got on at the BGI Irish Book Awards.
Yeah, congratulations. Should be interesting. Now, coming up after the break, we've got your capsule wardrobe nailed for the festive season. David's going to stick around for that. See you in a few.